no one will be condemned who takes refuge in him. So reads the word of the living God. Well, this Psalm 34, which is fairly well known, but if you've not come across it before, David is actually reflecting on his life and on a particular incident which has taken place. It's a deeply challenging incident. Indeed, it was an incident that could have cost him his life. And yet it becomes a moment not only for reflection on the danger and the intensity of the danger, but also particularly on the Lord's drawing near to comfort him and also to care and rescue him. Now, what a lot of people don't know about Psalm 34 is it's written in an acrostic pattern. And you might be saying, what on earth is one of those? Well, an acrostic is when you have a piece of poetry. This is a song, it's a psalm. And the first letter of every line, when you piece those letters together, usually in an acrostic, they form a word. So you might find a poet who's really clever, who not only gives you a brilliant poem, but has sneakily put a message by taking the first letter. It's almost like a code, the first letter of every line, and you piece that together, and there might be a word. It might be rude about the editor or something like that. But in this case, what you have is the acrostic forms pretty well all the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. You might say, well, what's the point of that? It's a bit like a poem that goes A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so on by taking the first letter of every line. And the point of it is this, that in Hebrew poetry, and the time when this was written, an alphabet acrostic was not uncommon. It was difficult to do, of course, to get every line to begin with the next letter in the Hebrew alphabet. We know in Welsh there are some forms of poetry, cynghanydd and things like that, which not only have a great opportunity for expression, but the form and the presentation of it is very, very detailed. But in Hebrew poetry, whenever you use the alphabet to do that, you were indicating a message of completeness, something that is comprehensive. In the same way today, we might say, well, it's the A to Z of everything. London A to Z. There's all the roads and all the streets and all the twists and turns, fully comprehensive and complete. We think David used this structure because he wants us to know as we read this psalm, not just by the content of the words, but the form of the psalm, that the Lord is his all in all, and he is complete in him. Of course, later on in the New Testament, the last book of the Bible, the book of the Revelation, in chapter 22, we will be told there that we will hear the voice of Christ in all his ascended glory. As you come to the end of that book, with all the struggles and the upheavals and everything that's gone on in the persecution of the church and the gathering together of his people, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first letter and the last letter of the Greek alphabet, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. So David in this psalm, Psalm 34, is reflecting and testifying to God's faithfulness in dark times. And this very act, we could say right at the beginning here this evening, of reflecting, thinking it through, remembering and testifying to God's goodness is an important discipline in the Christian life. As we do this, it can build faith as we reflect back on how the Lord has supported us in those dark times. I remember reading a book by Jonathan Haidt, who's an American kind of philosopher, sociologist, and he was looking at the things that young people believe, or a certain generation, a slice of American culture. And one of the features he noticed was it was a very anxious generation when compared to older generations in that culture. And his conclusion was simply this, amongst many things, but his primary conclusion was that the older generation are not so anxious because they've gone through many difficulties. And when you go through difficulties, invariably you know the experience that you pass through, the lessons you learn, they equip you for the next one and the next one and the next one. But when it comes to young people and they hit difficulties for the first time, it can genuinely seem like the end of the world. So this discipline of reflecting and remembering God's goodness in tough, difficult times is not just something we ought to do, it is to strengthen faith and build, if you like, resilience in faith as we go on to face other difficult times. You probably remember the chorus, count your blessings, name them one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord has done. That's a great discipline in the Christian life, and something probably we should be more active in. So David's not only sharing hope in this psalm, he's actually modeling something for us to do. Well, what was his challenging experience? What was the occasion that gave rise to the distress that we find him in Psalm 34 and the comfort that he finds in the Lord? Well, to answer that, we have to go to 1 Samuel 21. Don't worry if you can't find that right now. I'm going to read some verses from that in a moment to give you the historical context, the reason for the writing of this psalm. And as we join this psalm, we find David is on the run. And he's looking to take refuge. He's trying to find a safe place because the one he's running from is Saul, the king of Israel. David has been anointed, but he's king in waiting. And Saul is livid about it. And he's seeking to take David's life, literally. And David has got a group of men around him to support him, a band of brothers, as it were, and they're on the run. And eventually things get so bad that the only place of refuge and safety he can think of is to run out of Israel and into the domain of the Philistines, the ultimate enemies of God's people in those days, in the hope that he might find refuge there. And so that's exactly what he does. He goes to a place called Gath, which was a bit of a risk because many, many years previously, as a little lad, David had slain the giant Goliath, who was defying the armies of the Lord. But Goliath wasn't just Goliath. He was known as Goliath from Gath. And David goes to Gath. That's how desperate it is. And basically, he goes to the king in Gath, a man called Achish. This is what you read, briefly some verses now, directly from that incident that's recorded in 1 Samuel 21. Because what he's gone there to do is to ask, can I have refuge? Can I come into your city? Will you keep me and my men safe? But the servants of Achish said to him, isn't this David, the king of the land? Isn't he the one they sing about in their dances? Saul has slain his thousands, but David his 10,000s. David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of Achish, king of Gath. So he feigned insanity in their presence. And while he was in their hands, he acted like a madman, making marks on the door of the gate and letting saliva run down his beard. Achish said to his servants, look at the man. He's insane. Why bring him to me? Am I so short of madmen that you have to bring this fellow here to carry on like this in front of me? Must this man come in my house? So David has gone to Achish with this plan. The plan has failed. He finds himself in serious danger. And by entering into this drama, this act really of faking insanity, he is able to escape with his men. I think the incident shows us really just how vulnerable and fearful David must have felt at that time. It's an indicator also of the great pressure that he was under. He's in a situation where life could easily have turned in a way where he actually lost his own life. And it's so bad it leads him to pretending that he is insane. We would say today that he had a serious psychiatric condition. He acted like a madman, making marks on the doors of the gate, letting saliva down on his beard. He was basically trying to demonstrate what we would know today as psychotic behavior. And the plan works. David gets away with his men. And so in the psalm we read, Psalm 34, he writes about this being a time of his fears and troubles. We also read, if we were able to read that passage in its fullness in 1 Samuel 21 that describes the history behind this, we would have read these words. David took words to his heart and was very much afraid. So this is a dark time in David's life. His troubles are real, his fears are real, his heart is overwhelmed. As he writes now, reflecting on this difficult time and the deliverance that goes with it, he refers to himself during that time as being a man afflicted and a poor man. But the amazing thing, as we know from Psalm 34, is that it was into that situation that the Lord came and delivered him. Before we go on to look at that, I think it's good for us to pause here this evening and say that it's important in life to be honest as Christians about times of affliction and fear and maybe even failure. David has been incredibly honest, really, about a period in his life which is not that great. But he's been honest about it that you and I, as we read this psalm and others over the centuries, might be encouraged in the Lord and comforted. We come to the end of this service soon. We're going to sing the hymn Through All the Changing Scenes of Life. And it includes these words, of his deliverance I will boast, till all that are distressed from my example comfort take, and charm their griefs to rest. Sometimes our testimony needs to be not the triumphs of our lives, the positives, the great achievements, the good things. But sometimes our testimonies perhaps should be more filled with the realization of the dark times when the Lord has sustained and comforted us. Are we too triumphalistic, in other words, in our testimony about the Lord's work? The Apostle Paul does a similar thing in the New Testament when you come to 2 Corinthians. And in the very first chapter of that book, as he's writing what is effectively a defense about his ministry, because he's under huge criticisms. And he begins his defense with this: we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about the hardships we suffered in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired even of life. Indeed, in our hearts, we felt the sentence of death. That is an incredible confession, isn't it? Here is a man being open and honest in the presence of his ultra-critics and saying, before I begin to make a defense of who I am and my ministry, you need to know this. There was a period in my life where I felt I couldn't go on. There was a period in my life when I felt I preferred to die than to live. But, Paul goes on to write, this happened, and we might add, I'm telling you this so that you might know that we do not rely on ourselves, but on God, who raises the dead. And effectively, that is what we have in Psalm 34 as well, in terms of this principle. And of course, the truth is, and maybe you've been a Christian for a while, and if you have, I imagine you know this, that we learn more about the goodness of God in times of affliction than in times of plenty and ease. There is a mystery about suffering. None of us would choose it. And yet often along the journey through suffering, what we learn about God are lessons that we would not ever seek to swap for anything else. There was a moment in the ministry of Augustine when he was preaching to his people on the Psalms, and he was concerned that they would learn this lesson, and it kind of boils over in his writing in a very emotional way. You're too rich. Cry out in poverty. The Lord will listen. Cry to him in such a way that even if you have possessions, you do not trust on your own resources. Cry to him in the knowledge that you will always be a pauper as long as you do not possess him who makes you rich. So, as verse 2 and verse 3 of our psalm, Psalm 34, invites us, let the afflicted hear. Let people hear my testimony. It's what David is saying. Let the afflicted hear and rejoice. Glorify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together. So we look now at what was David's dilemma, this business. He's in the Philistines and all the rest of it, and he has to fake insanity to make an escape. But the great thing in this psalm is it points us to what the Lord did. And the significant thing about this is that although David is the actor, and what a performance it must have been, it totally convinced King Achish. And it's very descriptive here in Psalm 34, isn't it? Here's a guy literally clawing his nails down on a door of a physical, deep, profound physical agitation. He's got saliva dribbling down his beard. It's a very, very powerful description that we read there in 1 Samuel 21, or that I read to you. And yet, as you read this psalm, David does not attribute his escape to his own actions. So he doesn't give us a psalm where he says, oh, you know, I was really up against it, but I managed to pull it out the bag. I managed to put on an Oscar-winning performance, and I was able to convince, and what a great guy I am. He doesn't do that. No doubt it was a great performance. And as bold and as creative as David is, his claim is it is the Lord who's delivered him. Specifically, he tells us in verse 4, doesn't he? I sought the Lord, and he answered me. It was the Lord's answering that delivered him. Verse 6, this poor man called, and the Lord heard him. And the Lord saved him out of all of his troubles. Again, it's the Lord who he attributes as the one who preserves his life and brings him through that great crisis. I think there's something very beautiful about those two verses, verse 4 and verse 6, that I've just read to you. Particularly perhaps verse 6. I can remember a time in my own life where I felt so bereft and so lonely and so low spiritually and so down. And I read these words, this poor man called, and the Lord heard him. It's a wonderfully comforting statement, isn't it? And it's a reminder to you and to me that as Christians, that no matter where we are in life, no matter what we're facing, no matter how isolated, how lonely, how damaged we may feel by life, we are never, ever alone as a Christian. The Lord is with me. They tell us today that isolation and loneliness are really very serious things, and if left unchecked, they can damage us physically as well as mentally and emotionally. The Christian is never alone. Towards the end of this psalm, in verse 15, he's going to tell us, the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their cry. He's there listening to our cries, our distresses, not as some sort of divine driving instructor who's just sat there and can't wait for you to mess up, or some music examiner when you sit your piano exam or whatever it is, and they're waiting to hear that note that's incorrect or the timing that's wrong or whatever it is. No, the eyes of the Lord and his ears are on us because he loves us. We are his children. And his heart is with us and his concern is for us. That's why we see in verses 17 to 19, the righteous cry out, the Lord hears them. What does he do? He delivers them. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. A righteous person may have many troubles, but the Lord delivers him from them all. This is the greatest thing when we face troubles and struggles as Christians, as David did in this psalm. You know, it's an amazing moment. Poor David began the service by reading from the book of Hebrews. If we read on into chapter 13, there is some very wonderful words of comfort. God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. Those are wonderful words of comfort. So in that moment, as you lie in a hospital bed and folks have had to go, it's the end of visiting time, and it's the middle of the night, and you've got a big day tomorrow, and those moments of fear and anxiety come over you, a verse like that is wonderfully comforting, isn't it? Never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. And you probably know those words. Maybe you've seen them on a Christian calendar, on a text in somebody's house or something like that. But what few Christians really realize is the context for those words. Because they're prefixed with this statement: keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have. Because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. And what the writer of the Hebrews there is saying, well, what more do you want? Don't let the love of money drive your life. Instead, rest on the knowledge that God will never leave you or forsake you. So David emphasizes God is saving him out of all his troubles. And again, though we don't read of any dramatic appearance of the Lord, if anything's dramatic, it's David's acting, we might find ourselves asking, well, how exactly is it that the Lord delivered him out of all his troubles? When really, if you were to watch this as a film, all you would see was David and his performance before King Achish. And the answer he gives us in verse 7. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. This is his ultimate testimony, that in that moment of great darkness, he was not alone, and he was not acting alone. But the angel of the Lord was with him. The language in verse 7 is the military language. It's a kind of little fortress. You can imagine David and his warriors moving around the desert. It's night time, so they pitch camp. They would have put guards up. They would have had sentries. They would have been those who would be alert through the night. And it's that kind of picture that you have in those words, except here it's the angel of the Lord himself who's encamped around to preserve, to be on guard, to be on watch, and to care. The angel of the Lord. The angel of the Lord crops up, if we can put it that way, several times in the Old Testament. And they're usually in times of confusion. Just before Christmas, we did a few Sunday evenings looking at the account of God meeting with Moses through that incident in the wilderness with the burning bush. Maybe you remember that. But we're told that it was the angel of the Lord who was in that burning bush that was not consumed, who was the one speaking to Moses and promising to be with him when he would go in obedience back into Egypt and into Pharaoh's palace with a demand from heaven that Pharaoh was to let the children of Israel go. It was the angel of the Lord who did that. And then later on in the New Testament, we come across an incident, a moment in the history of Israel when the whole land is being ravaged by invasions. Terrible, terrible invasions from a very warlike people called the Midianites. Awful things were happening. And there was no leader in the land. There was no king. It was a right royal mess. They were just systematically being picked dry, bone dry, by the Midianites. We come to a little place, and there's a little fella called Gideon. And he's threshing corn, and he's hiding away in case anybody might see him, because the Danes were dangerous. And in that moment, the angel of the Lord comes to him. And he says, Gideon, I've got a great plan for you. You're to lead an army to drive out the Midianites. The angel of the Lord, again, in the Old Testament, is the one who receives worship. That's a big thing, isn't it? In the light of the Ten Commandments. You're to have no other gods before me. You're not to make an idol or a graven image and bow down to it. There is only one who is worthy of worship. And in the book of Zechariah, we find the angel of the Lord actually forgiving someone's sins. And so as we piece all of this together, we come to an unavoidable conclusion that the one who is referred to as the angel of the Lord is none other than Christ himself, operating and working in the world prior to his birth in Bethlehem. And David's testimony is that in that moment of absolute terror and confusion and uncertainty, he knew the reality of Christ encamping around him and delivering him. And we're not given the details, but it seems reasonable to believe that it was the knowledge that Christ was with him that comforted him and strengthened him and inspired him. And it was in the strength of Christ that he was able to put on that performance that convinced Achish. You see, sometimes the way God works with us when we're in crisis, when we're in trouble, when we're in difficulty, is not to take away the difficulties in the way in which we would like him to. But sometimes his great work is simply to remind us regularly that he is with us. Again, there's a little chorus I used to sing when I was in Sunday school. When with Christ in the vessel, you can smile at the storm. Storm doesn't go away. The rocking, the rolling, the buffeting of the boat, the size of the waves don't change. But with Christ in the vessel, you can smile at those storms. And it is the knowledge, David tells us in this psalm, it is just the knowledge that Christ is around him that comforts him and reassures him and is a wonderful thing. So where does this leave us tonight? You've got to go to school or college tomorrow. You've got to go to work. You've just got to go about whatever you've got to go about tomorrow. Where does this lead us? Well, this psalm shows us where it leaves us. It leaves us on the threshold of a very important invitation. And you can see it there in verse 8. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the person who takes refuge in him. And friends, it's ultimately speaking of Jesus Christ. And it's the invitation for us not merely to read this psalm and the drama of 1 Samuel and all the things that went on and acknowledge what went on in David's life and say, well, that's great for you, David. That's wonderful for you. No, David's concern is that you too and me together, or as individuals really, we might reach out and taste and see that the Lord is good. What is the context for tasting and seeing that the Lord is good? It's deep distress. Deep distress. And in times of deep distress, the invitation from heaven is taste and see that the Lord is good. Call on me in the day of affliction, and I will be near you. And David goes on, he said, don't only taste, he says, but in verse 9 he says, fear the Lord. You know, so I don't like the sound of that. Well, go on and read what else he has to say. He says, for those who fear him lack nothing. And if you're not sure, he gives an illustration. Even a lion may grow weak and hungry, but those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. It's the promise of God to care for you and to care for me in our deepest distresses. You might say, what is the fear of the Lord? David answers it, verses 11 and 12. Come, my children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord. Whoever of you loves life and desires to see many good deeds, keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking lies. Turn from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. It's an invitation to turn from our sins in faith and confidence in him, in Christ, and to live as he would have us live. There is rich comfort in this psalm, in those wonderful words. This poor man called, and the Lord heard him and delivered him out of all of his troubles. And that's where it leaves you and me. It leaves us with the invitation to trust Christ in the darkest moments and in the brightest moments, and to lean on him and to seek and to do it in the confidence that he has promised never to leave you, nor to forsake you. In conclusion here this evening, the Psalms, of course, are the songbook of the Bible. They're the hymn book, if you like, of the Bible. But you know what? Ultimately, the Psalms are the songbook of Jesus. And the Psalms are psalms that he could sing, not a sing-along in the synagogue with the other guys who were there, but the singing of his own experience to his Father in heaven and to the Spirit who sustained him. This psalm is a testimony of deliverance. And when Jesus sings it, it takes us to one place, to Calvary. That there, in the darkest moments of his suffering, as we know, the Son called out to the Father and put his own safety, his own preservation into his Father's hands. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And the Father heard him, and he delivered him from all of his enemies. You know, in Psalm 18, you hear Jesus singing about that. I'm going to read it to you. The moments on the cross. The cords of death entangled me. The torrents of destruction overwhelmed me. The cords of the grave coiled around me. The snares of death confronted me. In my distress, I called to the Lord. I called to my God for help. From his temple, he heard my voice. My cry came up before him into his ears. The earth trembled and quaked, and the foundations of the mountain shook. They trembled because he was angry. Smoke rose from his nostrils. Consuming fire came from his mouth. Burning coals blazed out of it. He parted the heavens and came down. Dark clouds were under his feet. He mounted the cherubim and flew. He soared on the wings of the wind. He made darkness his covering, his canopy around him, the dark rain clouds of the sky. Out of the brightness of his presence, clouds advanced with hailstones and bolts of lightnings. The Lord thundered from heaven. The voice of the Most High resounded. He shot his arrows, scattered the enemies. Great bolts of lightning and routed them. The valleys of the sea were exposed, and the foundations of the earth laid bare at your rebuke, O Lord, at the blast of your breath from your nostrils. He reached down from on high and took hold of me. He drew me out of deep waters. He rescued me from my powerful enemy, from my foes who were too strong for me. They confronted me in the day of my disaster, but the Lord was my support. He brought me into a spacious place because he delighted in me. The one who went to Calvary, who offered his own psalm of distress to heaven, and went on to declare the psalm of praise in the deliverance of his Father, and of the Spirit who on the third day raised him from the dead. The same one is with you. He was the one who encamped around David in his distress, and he is the one who is with you and has promised, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. And it's all because of that great victory on Calvary. Friends, we're going to sing that hymn which I referred to a few moments ago to close this service. It is the well-known hymn, through all the changing scenes of life, in trouble and in joy.